wrap up. I hope, as always, just reading the whole scripture in one sitting is just a great exercise for us. I do want to encourage you to do in your personal time what we've just done, and that's to pray over it before you read it. You know what, I think so often we think of these as like check boxes, but what if there's tremendous wisdom that God almost wants to like make it glow off the page, but you have to ask, and then sometimes we just forget to even ask. So we're going to go into depth on a few different themes that are found in these proverbs. I'm sure you're figuring out by now that every proverb has different nuggets in it, but the themes are almost all exposed by now. We got a whole lot about justice, a whole lot about right relationships, a whole lot about words. And so those themes are just going to continue to appear, and we're going to continue to talk about them, because if Proverbs wants to use 31 chapters to tell us about how to use our words wisely, then it's probably something we should talk about at least 31 times. So the first kind of topic, I just kind of create my own subheadings, but I was thinking of submitting all things to the Lord. And so we're going to look at verses 1, 2, 3, and 7. And I'm going to do my best to kind of move a little bit quicker through some of the teaching portion, because it seems to me like a lot of the fruit is happening in our discussion. So let's jump into verse number 1. It says this: "The plans of the heart belong to a man, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord." The insinuation starts like this. It's not just any man or any woman. It's actually, the assumption is that we're talking about a wise person. So we're talking about wise people. And it says that the plans of the heart belong to the wise. This is a really interesting word if you want to write it down and you like words. The word plan is not just like, what are you doing later? I don't know, I got plans to go to the movies. This word plan is a deliberate, wise plan. Let me give you a couple scenarios that for context. The first one I found is that this word for plan gets used for a well-executed military strategy. So this is not just like I woke up and made plans. It's pulling from previous experience. It's consulting wise people. It's praying. It's thinking deeply. It's writing notes before you come to a conclusion. This word also gets used in other literature to describe what a lawyer does before they present a case to defend a client. So that's what this word is. So the idea that the wise of heart have plans. So the plans of the heart belong to the wise man. So here's my question for you. We can just chat really quickly. How many of you try to make really good plans? Yeah. How many of you are like, I am somebody who likes to set goals that are months or years down the road? We could talk about just normal stuff, retirement, saving for a child's education. These are like big plans. How many of you know that like we should plan like that? But there is something going on in the Bible that it drives me nuts, because the Bible never tries to solve this tension. It just tells you, here's the tension, it exists, act accordingly. Here's the tension. The tension is that we are supposed to plan. We are supposed to make wise plans. We are supposed to consult people. We are supposed to pray. We're supposed to do that. But then the Bible also says that you shouldn't even count on tomorrow being a reality for you. So how do you do both at the same time? Isn't that a great question? The Bible has no concern in telling you how to solve the tension. It instead says you should 100% do this, and you should also acknowledge, this is the second part of verse 1, but the answer of the tongue is from the Lord. The word answer is really the response. The response to your wise plan belongs to the Lord. Yeah, exactly. And I think here's the issue is, we're going to talk about this in the question, how many of you would openly call yourself a control freak? Anybody want to admit it in front of everyone? How many of you at least like control? We live in a culture that tells us that the successful people are the ones who are really good at determining their own outcomes. And so we do stuff. We try to insulate ourselves to control the outcome. Maybe it's a huge bank account. Maybe it's eventually I want to live in a giant house with a guard shack so that the riffraff can't come in and out, right? And it's this idea of like we could ascend to a place where we're in such utter control of everything that we don't have any variables that could get to us. And that is somehow in our culture, that's supposed to be a value. The Bible says, wait a second, make wise plans, execute them to the best of your ability, but also know that you don't get to be responsible for how these plans end up. This is a tension that we have to live in. I wrote this: human responsibility to plan and execute plans according to the will of God, and that God has intimate knowledge and interest in bringing outcomes that further his kingdom, but his outcomes are not always the ones that we would like to happen, are they? Yeah, what are you going to say, Chet?
I heard it once said that you should plan like he's not coming for 50 years and live like he's coming tomorrow.
Oh, that's wise. Yeah.
That's why I'm bringing it.
We're going to get there, my friend. So I think here's the tension, because let's talk about this. I promise this is the longest we'll talk about a single verse. We talked about all the way back in Proverbs that kind of Proverbs as a whole has this kind of mission. And the mission or the purpose is this, that if you live in the way that Proverbs says, your life will be good most of the time. Does that mean that it's a guarantee that if you just live by this blueprint, everything will be great all the time? No. But if you live out the wisdom of God over a long enough period of time, you will see a lot of people thrive in that scenario. How many of you know somebody who's like, they live for God, and man, they just get trial after trial after trial all the time? That does exist. But here's the thing. I think this, to highlight this, we've been talking a lot lately. You could, from a young age, you could just be like a workout warrior. You go to the gym every day. You got cardio and strength. You eat well. You know all about diet. You have a spiritually rich and mature faith. You've done everything right. And then you get struck dead by a heart attack at 50. Is that possible? Sure. Yeah, of course it's possible. It doesn't mean that that can't happen, but it still means that we invest in things. We sacrifice the present for the sake of the future, all the while not knowing what the future holds because God is in charge of the future. Verse 2, let's keep going. All the ways of a man are pure in his own eyes, but the Lord weighs the spirit. I was reading this week, and I read like 3 different commentaries, and they all had kind of the same exact idea, and it's something you all know to be true, because I know it's true to me too. How good are human beings at justifying that what I'm already doing is right and good? You ever notice that? Just get into a conversation that requires one person to change their mind. Man, people will do mental gymnastics to prove that their dumbest point ever, the stupidest thing you could ever believe is true and right and good. And half the time it's you doing it, right? All the ways of a man are pure, ... in their own eyes. How difficult is it in humility to swallow pride and accept change or correction? It's interesting because our culture says like the person who's got it all figured out is the one who ascends to the top. I think the Bible would say the one who can recognize the need for change and correction is actually the more mature person, not the one who's got it all figured out. But the Lord weighs the spirit. So often, I think we like to walk the path of least resistance. The message, especially of the Old Testament, to shoulder your cross and follow me, is to say that the ultimate expression of love actually requires a great deal of sacrifice, a sacrifice that's willing to lay down its life for someone else. This is not the path of least resistance. This is kind of a tangent, but I've been giving this a lot of thought. Our world is changing rapidly. Did you know that? And I don't know that there's a ton of like blatant hostility towards Christians like in your face, but can you all like look at the world and say like, I wouldn't be surprised if that's coming soon. Do you know that when that comes, you will find out very quickly who really believes in Jesus and is willing to shoulder their cross? Do you know that? Because in hardship, what happens? The true faithful people are concentrated down because when it costs you something extreme, a lot of people will say, I was kind of in it for the social friendships. I was kind of in it for the moral code that it kind of gave my kids. I was kind of in it because my membership gave my kid a scholarship to the local Christian school, if we're honest, right? You ever seen these countries where Christianity is outlawed and you find out that there's not a lot of Christians, but the ones that do meet are meeting like underground late at night in home churches and incredible things are happening? it's a concentration of the number, but the power is everybody who's there is not there out of any other reason but pure faith because it costs a great deal. That is a total tangent. Can't remember why I even said it. But here we go. Verse 3. Commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. I want you to pause for a moment and read verse 1 in your head and then read verse 3 in your head. This is the tension. Verse 1, it says, the plans of the heart belong to man, but the outcome belongs to the Lord. Then verse 3 says, commit your work to the Lord, and your plans will be established. Do you see the tension? Ultimately, I think the result is the same, that the outcome belongs to the Lord. I was thinking and writing and journaling a bit about this, and this is what I like about the outcome belonging to the Lord. Let's talk about this really quick. If the outcomes belong to God, and you have a really epic outcome, what is the takeaway? It's God who did it. So what's the word? Humility. Right? Man, you did awesome this year. Matt, you got Teacher of the Year for the entire universe. That's awesome. Teacher of the Universe. Sorry, Steve. Matt beat you. Sorry, Bo. Matt beat you all. He's Teacher of the Universe, right? But when it's submitted to the Lord, what's the outcome? Man, I'm so grateful that God gave me the platform and the courage and the boldness to do the work that he called me to, right? So humility means I don't take too much credit. Man, this is the worst year ever. I failed miserably. I did everything I thought I was supposed to do, and everything just kept coming, and now I'm in the hole worse than I've ever been. What's the outcome when it's submitted to the Lord? Huh? Humility. Yeah. It's not the self-pity and the self-loathing of I'm so terrible. It's, man, I submitted it to the Lord. I learned a lot. I was shaped in a way I didn't expect. And I learned how to trust God. And I'm not sure how God's going to get me out of this. But the next plan is submitted to him as well. Verse 7 says this. When a man or woman's way pleases the Lord, he makes even his enemies to be at peace with him. I was reading chunks of the old Hebrew commentaries, and I loved what one rabbi said. He said, when a person's ways please the Lord, they have this type of temperament. They have a temperament of wisdom, truth-telling, reliability, kindness, generosity, and mercy. And even your enemies want peace. And when it comes time to broker peace, what kind of person is an enemy looking for? They're looking for someone who really legitimately wants peace also. And they see in you somebody who's reasonable, that might be willing to listen and find common ground to make peace on. So I think what it's saying is that you should be a person that kind of lays flat the ground for the peace deal to be brokered. It's kind of a cool way to think of it. So let's talk about being control freaks. Here's the question. A major value and product of our culture is to desire to control our own destiny, even to admit that we're control freaks. How do you think we should balance making wise, intentional plans for our lives while holding loosely the actual outcomes of our plans as up to God's will? And then here's a practical question. How can you grow in these two areas? Being better, more wise and diligent at planning for the future, but also simultaneously, number two, giving up the desire to be in control of all the outcomes. This might be a question that you are more of a listener at your table. Maybe there's somebody to share a personal experience of wisdom in this. But why don't we take 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll regroup and jump back in at verse 11. So, ready, go. Well, I hope at the very least the verses and the conversation at least maybe flick off a light in your head to begin to think about how you're attempting to control everything. We're going to move on to verse 11. Verse 11, I'm going to move quickly, but I wanted to point this out because we've almost had this exact verbatim verse with one little tweak to it. And I read it and I thought, haven't we already read this verse about weights and measures and God being the one who measures the scale and all that? So I looked it up, and this is the beauty of the Bible and Proverbs. Just a small tweak actually means something significantly new to add to kind of the idea of God being the author of what is just and moral and good. So it says this in verse 11. A just balance and scales are the Lord's. All the weights in the bag are his work. So we've talked about this idea of scales. I did a little bit more digging because I had some more time, but in the ancient world there was tons of scales. It wasn't like the grocery store where you just plop something on it and it tells you the weight. There was like a scale for gold that was set up for one side to be measured out for gold on this side, and whatever else you're going to measure on the other side. Now here's the deal that I didn't know, is that there was somebody who would come and check the scales, and they would use a measurement. It was usually a metal that was stamped with the approval. And what it was is it was like a piece of metal that you could drop, because here's what could happen. Somebody could very easily take, say, maybe an ounce of gold or silver. You guys all know roughly about how big that is? Just say an ounce of gold, right? Someone in the ancient world could take it home, they could melt it, then they could recast it at 90% of the size, maybe slightly thinner. And to the naked eye, how many people do you think would pick that up? Not many, right? So now it's 0.9 ounces of gold. Now if you plop that sucker on the scale, and the scale is 10% off, and it says it's 1 ounce of gold, is it that big of a deal to scam a tenth of an ounce? Yeah, it's a big deal. Is it an even bigger deal or a larger scandal if you do it 500 times in one day? Yeah, that's a huge deal. So what's to make sure that people don't do that? How is it done? It's that people would carry around. Somebody would come through and they would check the scales. Now, this is how it would work. It says that a just balance and the scales are the Lord. So he's the one measuring what is just and what is moral and what is good. All the weights in the bag are his work. So the weights that check the scale to make sure they're measuring properly, it says, belong to him. Now this is the piece that I thought was cool and why I even wanted to bring it up. It uses this word, in the bag. And I was wondering what that meant. The weights in the bag apparently are all the smaller weights. They're the ones that measure the fractions of things and the little things. And I think there's two takeaways that are important. It's number one, God is not just interested in large-scale justice issues. He's not just interested in genocides and mass murder. Is he worried about that? Absolutely, yes. God is also very worried that the widow who's just trying to buy just enough flour to make one loaf of bread is not getting ripped off. He's equally as concerned about that. He's equally concerned about small injustices. Not only do they add up over time to be something big, he wants to hold people account, not just for the big things, but also for the little things. God has his eye looking out for the justice of the small guy. So to use the proper weights and judge according to God's will is absolutely essential to someone who wants to consider themselves as wise. Verse 18 says this. This is about the spirit of pride and the spirit of humility. How many of you were around when we did that Clash of the Kingdom series where we did the 7 deadly sins? And we kind of use the 7 deadly sins as kind of the framework, but the vice of pride is an interesting one. In fact, a lot of people say pride is the author of all the other vices, right? It's the one that Satan ropes you in on, and then all the other ones just start to fall right in line with pride. But the remedy to pride is humility. So let's read a little bit about this. Verse 18 says this, pride goes before destruction, and a haughty spirit before the fall. How many of you already know this verse? How many of you have memorized it slightly differently, maybe like a blend of the two? How have you memorized it? Pride goes before the fall. Okay, so it's kind of a blending of the two. I think the sentiment is the same. So let's talk about pride going before destruction and a haughty spirit before the fall. I think we need to go back and talk about pride itself and what it does. Why does pride go before, I want you to notice a fall. It doesn't say the fall. It says pride goes before a fall. So I think the idea is pride is kind of the source of this stumbling and fumbling through life that ends in destruction. The haughty spirit goes before a fall, and pride goes before destruction. So this is an ongoing problem of stumbling and tripping through life, and the ultimate end result is destruction. So what does pride do? Why does it go before destruction? I wrote down a couple things. The prideful person keeps Their pride keeps them from noticing small dangers in life. So I wrote down moral, physical, emotional, all kinds of things. The prideful person doesn't pick up on a social cue that this relationship that's very important to me is about to end because I'm not reading that the other person doesn't feel like I care for them and I'm always out for myself. They don't pick up on that. That's a stumble. That's a fall. The second thing is this, is that even when the prideful person does recognize danger, they're usually the person who's apt to think that they can conquer it on their own. My own strength will get me through this. I think this is very similar to what we might call like narcissistic personality disorder, is probably this like concentrated down. Everything revolves around me. I'm worthy of being worshipped because that's what pride is. It's the worship of self, that I'm worthy of all things. I can accomplish all things. I can control my own destiny, and I'm worthy of all those things. So the proud who stumble and fall and remain proud will end in destruction. It will be self-inflicted, but they won't see it. So this is the thing I think is interesting that we've talked about, is that pride, one of the symptoms of pride is a reluctance to recognize pride. Does that make sense? It's why it's like the most pervasive, nasty of all the sins, because the prideful person can never recognize that I am a prideful person. It's very difficult. And so often the prideful person, maybe you've heard testimonies before, and people will say, like, I was just a prideful, arrogant, narcissistic, full of myself person. And what do these people almost always need to shake themselves out of it? They need to be humbled. They need something terrible to happen. What's that? They need a destruction on this side of eternity. And sometimes they turn around and say, I thank God for the destruction I had on this side of eternity because it would have ended there. Verse 19 goes on and says this, it is better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. It's an interesting verse, and I think what makes it especially interesting to me is that this sentiment is something that, let's remember who wrote this proverb. Solomon. This is kind of an interesting thought experiment because I read this a few times and it dawned on me, wait a second. Solomon, what do we know about Solomon? He's filthy rich, right? What is his end destruction for him? What was it? I'm sorry, what is it? He has lots of wives. He decides, you know what? God's going to get a baller temple. I'm going to build him a really nice temple. What does it matter what my palace is compared to the temple, right? So what is his downfall? It's his pride. It's his pride. It hasn't got him yet when he writes Proverbs, but he already notices something. This is what he notices. It's better to be of a lowly spirit with the poor. Is it interesting that Solomon is picking up on something, even from his vantage point on the throne as the king? It's better to be with the lowly spirit with the poor than to divide the spoil with the proud. I read this, I didn't know this, but the idea of the lowly in spirit in the Old Testament is often associated with kind of this idea that we're in this oppression together. This is like Babylon talk. Like we have endured something terrible together at the hands of an oppressor, and so we're in this together. And I read that a rabbi wrote this, that in this condition, the lowly in spirit, they share camaraderie, kindness, understanding, empathy that the rich can never understand. Now, that doesn't mean that if you're rich, you can't be empathetic or you can't be kind. What it means is that people who have endured hardship in a way that's common to each other have a kind of a bond together. And Solomon notices it and says it's better to be lowly in spirit and have all that with the poor, to set aside all the belongings that you might want to accumulate on earth, than it would be to divide the spoil with the proud. What does it mean to divide the spoil with the proud? It means that maybe we cash out of this business we created, and there's 4 or 5 partners, and we're all prideful, narcissistic guys, and now we got to split it up evenly. How do prideful people split things evenly? Who gets more? The guy who worked the hardest, right? And who worked the hardest? They all did, right? When it comes time to cash out, who gets the most? They're all prideful guys. They all think they work the hardest. They all think they're the best. They all think this way. So he says it's better to do that than to divide the spoil. Why? Because when you try to divide the spoil with the proud, it ends in arguments, cheating, stealing. You ever notice how like these super white-collar fraud crimes are always people who are already filthy rich? Isn't that crazy? You ever follow like the Bernie Madoff scandals? The dude was already like a billionaire, and he's like, I got nothing better to do than defraud people out of a few billion more. Like, it's just crazy, because this is the prideful arrogance of dividing the spoil with the proud. What's that? Yeah. Okay. No, you're good. For the sake of time, we're going to flip over. We're going to stop at the next section for, I think, a fruitful conversation. Any comments or thoughts there? Okay. We're going to jump into verses 21, 22, and 23. But before we do, this is a new theme that's been added. So how many of you have noticed that Proverbs has probably the most amount to say about words, about the power of words, about how speech can... but it hasn't used this word. If it has, not enough for me to see it. It's the word persuasion. This is kind of a new addition. That words can be used for persuasion. So let's talk about what this word means. What does persuasion mean? The Giants are better than the Dodgers. How many of you are persuaded? Okay, that's never worked. So what does persuasion mean? It means the ability to do what? To help somebody change their mind. Okay, so there's an element of changing mind. How does changing mind happen? Go ahead.
Just getting new information.
Okay, so there's got to be some new information. Do you think just new information is enough? Persistence, okay. Persistence could be part of it.
The ability of the other party to be open to new ideas.
Okay, openness.
Seeing is believing.
I think a lot of these go together. Back to what JT said, openness. What makes somebody open? Okay, so no threats. Can't feel threatened. Yes, safety. Okay, it's an attitude. All these things go together. So this idea of persuasion in the context of Proverbs is to say, I want to persuade you in the direction of wisdom, but it's not just any wisdom, it's God's wisdom, and God's wisdom begins with what? Fear of the Lord. Okay, so this is, I would say this is like evangelistic wisdom. What would be the best way for someone to share wisdom with you? Well, let's back up. Who would you be apt to listen to? If you read Proverbs 16, it would be the gray-haired man. Just kidding. Sort of, actually, but. Okay, someone who's experienced it. Okay. Tell me who they are. Like, not their name necessarily, but like, what are their characteristics? What are they like? Smart? Yep. What's that? Respected, absolutely. Good listener, that's very important. I'm going to write that. Okay, anything else? Good intentions. Like when you say that, you mean like they actually want your best for you. Okay? Are they someone who talks a lot, a little, a medium amount? They're mute? Like, where are we at? Huh? It depends? How so?
It depends if it needs a lot of words or it doesn't.
So the word economy is like thoughtful and calculated. Okay? Anything else? Prayerful, yeah? I'm not going to write anymore because I don't want to hurt my back. My wife's an occupational therapist, and I guarantee this is not how you're supposed to write. Okay, so all of these things. Now, for a moment, does everybody have a person that comes to mind? Either somebody that you know or somebody that you knew of that offered this to you? Okay. I would imagine that all the people we're thinking of are probably very, very, very different, but in these ways, they're probably very, very, very similar. This is what it says. The wise of heart is called discerning, and sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. Sweetness of speech. Isn't that cool? Really, really kind of like mind-blowing thing I read this week. It says the wise of heart is called discerning. In Hebrew, this word discerning can actually be a noun, and it can be translated as the wise of heart is called the discerning one. And this is why it matters, because it turns out that the discerning one was a title usually given to somebody in a village as the wise person. Man, the weather has been really, really crazy. I'm just thinking about like ancient world. Should we plant this seed in the ground, or should we wait out one more storm? Could be the difference between life and death around here. What do we do? Who do we ask? Oh, why don't you go down the street and talk to the discerning one? That's literally the title of somebody in town in Hebrew culture. Isn't that cool? So the wise of heart is called the discerning one. Solomon says something everybody already knows. Okay, now I'm thinking of a person. I'm reading Solomon's Proverbs, but now I'm thinking about like the legitimate, real person that my town trusts to have wisdom. Sometimes the wisest thing, by the way, is I don't know, but I either know somebody who will, or I'm willing to help you find the right person. And sweetness of speech increases persuasiveness. I read this week. A person of understanding and discernment will speak graciously, thoughtfully, and with the listener in mind. This is not just, I know the answer to that question. Flip, here you go. It's, I know you, and I know how you operate, and I know how to speak to you in a way that you will receive it. I think this is, in some way, what Paul is saying, to be all things to all people, to recognize every situation is different and being adaptable and moldable enough to fill it. This will not be a person who is grating, harsh, or mean with words. This will be a person who is measured and pleasant. This type of speaker puts a listener at ease because their true heart is to teach and lead with others' best interest in mind. Who said that? Somebody said, good listener. Who said it? Bo said it. Yeah. This is somebody who really listens to what your real question is because they want to provide a real answer to your question. Then the idea of speech being sweet. What does it mean that speech is sweet? Anybody ever heard somebody tell them maybe advice or something and it's packaged in a way that you're like, that's exactly, I totally get what you're saying now. That makes perfect sense. How you organize those words for me hit me like right in the heart. I get it. You know what that is? That is what this person is. Proverbs continues, and it says this in verse 22. Good sense is a fountain of life to him who has it, but the instruction of fools is folly. Now, usually when I think of the word fountain, I think of like the center of a university campus or like the mall that's got like water spraying out. Turns out there wasn't a whole lot of that 4,000 years ago in ancient Israel. So what was a fountain? Yeah, it was a high-pressure natural spring with like unlimited water. Like this is the place to come. And when you're in a desert place, what is water? It's everything. It's the potential and possibility that life exists at all, right? So what does it mean that good sense is a fountain of life to him who already has it? Yeah, it's refreshing. The person who already has wisdom also, because they have wisdom, has the stuff that they need for more wisdom. Wisdom begets more wisdom. What you need to grow even more wisdom is to have the wisdom to grow wisdom, right? And then the opposite is true. But the instruction of fools is folly. The word for instruction is the same as the discipline. So when I read this is how I understand it. The daily routine or rhythm of life of the fool is what's needed to grow more foolishness. I was listening to a little devotion about Proverbs 16 as I was preparing, and this older pastor was sharing a story from when he was in college about a fool begetting more foolishness. And he was telling this guy about a story about a guy who lived in the dormitory with him, and a really poor guy kind of left his family in the Midwest behind to go make it in the city and went to the university, but didn't bring a lot of street smarts with him, just book smarts. And what happened is he got himself in this cycle where he crashed his car, and it was going to cost him a few $100s then to fix it. The only problem was is he needed the car to get to work to make the money he was going to need to pay for the car. Well, it turns out that how the foolish events all collided, there was a group of guys that were going to go to Las Vegas. And this man decided in the moment, I'm going to go get that money I need to fix that car. So he emptied his bank account and he took it off to Las Vegas. And you guys know how this works. He sat down. Well, I hope maybe you've seen it in a movie probably. That's what I meant to say. I don't want to rat her out. Mark, your mom told me one of the funniest Las Vegas stories I've ever heard in my life. Let's just say your dad thought she was in the hotel room, and when he came back, she was not, at a pastor's conference in Las Vegas. So this guy sits down with all the money at the slot machine. You know how this goes, how a slot machine goes. He was up and down and up and down and down, 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 up and down, just enough to make you think like, oh, your chance is just around the corner, right? Until he had no money left. Now he's totally out of money, and he decides he has no choices now. So what does he do? He goes to the window and asks for a cash advance at some crazy thing because he's got to win it all now, and he puts it all on black or red or whatever the game is, and he loses that too. You see how foolishness just begets foolishness. Would it not have made more sense just right off the bat just to take out that stupid loan to fix the car and then just pay it off? Yeah. So this is how foolishness sets the stage for more foolishness. You've probably seen people just continually make foolish decision after foolish decision, and they can't seem to process, how do I get out of that? Well, I want you to take a look at verse 21, 22, and 23. Because sometimes we think Proverbs is just organized in a way that's just kind of scattershot and throw all these cool sayings on the page, and wherever they land, they land. But this is what I think. I think for the foolish person to get out of the discipline of doing foolish things, they need somebody with persuasive, wise, sweet speech to intervene, to say, hey, that was one of the stupidest things I have ever seen. And I'm not just here to make fun of you. I'm telling you there's a better way. Could I have 5 minutes of your time just to share some things with you? Because this is what verse 23 says. The heart of the wise makes his speech judicious and adds persuasiveness to his lips. The idea of speech being judicious is it's intentional. The words that are chosen are on purpose. It's not a waste of words. The speech is calculated. What needs to be said? And that's what I'm going to say because there's word economy. How many of you know there's people who have maybe too little word economy? Like, come on, do you talk? You ever? No? There's also people who are like, do you ever stop talking? I think probably I'm probably on the latter more often. It's measured, and it comes from a place of listening and having a dialogue. Persuasive wisdom requires that somebody is curious, interested, and intrigued by wisdom, but it also requires that a wise person is willing to intervene and give it to them. Because what have we learned? If you want wisdom, you don't hang around foolish people. Was that last week or 2 weeks ago? Foolish people are not just going to stumble upon wisdom. They need somebody to bring it to them. The inner wisdom is the motivation of the heart, and it makes speech well configured and measured in a way that people want to listen and they're willing to change. Great rhetoric leads to great persuasiveness. I was thinking about one of my favorite spiritual authors. How many of you know Henry Nouwen? Henry Nouwen had one major issue. Well, he probably had many, but I can think of one off the top of my head. His major issue was that he was one of the most talented spiritual writers of all time, but he was terrible at selling books. And you want to know why? He was so good with words, he could never write anything more than like 40 pages, and no publisher is ever going to buy a book deal that's 40 pages long. So they did, if you ever buy his books, they did everything they could. They put a painting and a piece of artwork next to every page just to try to double the pages. But you read his stuff, and it's like they tried to make the size font 14 just so they could get to 110 pages. They did this, why? Because his words were so thoughtful and calculated. The word economy was so precise. I don't need more words. I said exactly what I wanted to say, and now I can just back up and let it be. Have you ever read writing like that? Yeah, it's great writing. So here's the question. Over the past few weeks, we've been discussing the element of wise speech that begins with being a very intentional listener and a discerner prior to speaking. So what bad habits or tendencies can we fall into that make us poor listeners? This is going to be an interesting conversation because it's all about being quiet and listening. So somebody is going to have to speak first. How does being a good listener make your speech sweet and increase your persuasiveness of your words? So that's what we will do. Let's talk about that for 8 or 10 minutes, and then we'll talk about all the gray hair. I think it might be fruitful to list some things. Maybe instead of passing the microphone, we could take 2 or 3 minutes. Impediments to good listening. Just shout them out loud enough for me to hear. Speaking. Squirrels. Yeah, tech. I was discussing how I hate when people do this to me, and then I don't realize how hypocritical it is until I catch myself doing it to other people. It's you're having a conversation, you're not even on your phone, you're not actively on it, you just put it on the table. You know the screen goes black, and then you get a notification that lights up, and you just break eye contact for a second, just to. I hate when people do that, and then when I catch myself doing it, I feel this tinge of oh, you are that man. Yeah. Okay, technology. What else? Multitasking. Yeah, multitasking. How about agreeing to listen to someone when it's just not a good time to listen to them? So timing. We were discussing the need to grow and just saying hey, I would love to listen to you. I hear this. Could you give me 20 minutes to finish what I'm doing and then get in a place where I can really listen to you instead of yeah, sure, sit down, and then giving somebody 30% of your attention. Anything else? Yeah, bad eye contact. I think this tech thing is not just phones. It could be the TV's on. The family transistor radio is playing. I don't know how to describe it, but what about the phenomenon of somebody said something I disagree with and I'm already thinking about my response? What's that called? Agenda? Yeah, I think that's a good way to put it. Yeah, that's the unactive. Everybody knows what active listening is? It's just the small cues of looking at someone's eyes and nodding, or hey, I hate to pause you, I don't totally understand. It's these cues of I listened to what you heard and I'm trying to follow along. Anything else? This is not meant to be judgmental, it's just a thought. what about the times when you're trying to listen well, but the reason you can't listen is because the stuff someone's sharing is so raw and all over the place, it's not organized for them to share it yet. Does that make sense? You won't believe what happened, and this person said that, and you're like, I don't even know who that person is. Oh, we're moving on, and you're like, I'm trying, and it's like, I can't even wade through this, because really what it is maybe a message to the person sharing, which could be us, of have your thoughts in order to share with somebody in a way that they could actually follow them. This is like the 5-year-old phenomenon. Hey, how was school today? And you're like, that sounds awesome. Did you get in trouble? Nope. Cool. We'll call it a victory. I have no idea what you just said. Anything else? I think these are all good self-awareness tools. I know, Mark, you read The Anxious Generation. He talks a lot about what happens to listening when even a phone is out. I think the retention is like, 40% less? Not even on your phone, just having it visible. If that's true, the simple reality of like, hey, I want to listen to you, let me put my phone in my backpack or in my bag really quick. It's like a legitimate tool. When the squirrels come out, just forgetting they're not there, turning a TV off, turning these things off, I really want to listen to you. Multitasking or timing, hey, can I finish what I'm doing so I can listen? I wonder if maybe the amount of listening actually would get less, but we would retain so much that people would feel heard more. Here's where we're going to end. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. I think there's a few observations before we wrap up about gray hair. The first is just cultural. In the ancient world, people didn't live super long. And so if you're thinking through the lens of Proverbs, hey, this is the wisdom to live a good, wholesome, long life, gray hair is a sign of what? Long life. That is a person who clearly has some wisdom because they made it in long life, right? I think that's cool. That's great. Everyone in gray hair says amen. I think there's a couple other things here. Age does not equal wisdom. But age correlates with wisdom. We know the difference, right? Just because somebody is older and has gray hair does not mean they're wise. But if we had to draw a bell curve of if we had to just draw a graph of age and wisdom, I don't know why I did my graph like that. Age and wisdom, I would say that statistically it probably looks like this, right? Doesn't mean that everyone is. But it does mean that, hey, when it comes time to think about who are the wise people in my life, I'm 20, I have had a girlfriend for 3 days, and I'm thinking about marrying her. She's the love of my life. My life will never be complete without her. I just know it. I'm going to ask my wise friends, hey, you haven't finished high school yet. What do you think, right? You got to think about these things. Like, who is in this circle of wisdom? But here's, I think, a cool thing, and I think this might be a little bit about what Proverbs is saying, is that gray hair is a physical thing that you can see. There's physical tells of somebody who is actually wise. Do you know that? I heard somebody say this before, that if you're at church, people who walk slowly are people that are worth talking to. Have you ever heard that before? That's like a maxim. People who walk slowly, they're not in a hurry. That means they're probably someone who will stop to listen. There are things that you can see. Gray hair, that is a physical thing that you can see and say, hey, that's whittled it down to this might be a wise person worth talking to, right? Someone who stands up tall, someone who looks fit in old age, and you're having questions about how do I stay healthy, right? Somebody who physically has a Bible under their arm that's weathered, and they're walking through, and you're thinking, that might be a wise person. There are physical things that you can see, and we don't have to pretend that there's not. So I think in some way, this is what it's saying. Gray hair is a crown of glory. It is gained in a righteous life. God has given longevity to those who have lived for him. Anybody want to say amen to that? Amen. Let's pray, and then we can hang out. You can dip out. You can do whatever you got to do. God, thank you for your word tonight. And thank you that every Wednesday we can just gather and ask for discernment and clarity on how we can live lives of wisdom. And God, I pray against the phenomenon of we went to Bible studies so we're good with God. And I pray for real opportunities, maybe things that were spoken about or thoughts that we had tonight that are just kind of like floating up in our minds. I pray for concrete opportunities to put them into practice. God, would you put us in scenarios where we have real choices to listen well or not? Would you give us those tests to shape us and mold us into the people you want us to be? And God, when we fail, I pray that you would remind us often of your mercy and your grace for us, that we don't land face first on the concrete, but we land in your arms and you dust us off and put us back on the right path. So we love you. We thank you that we get to do this with this group of people. We get to discern and grow and laugh and bring joy to one another. And I pray in the week off next week that you would prepare our hearts for Pentecost, that we would really just recognize the gift and the beauty of your Spirit in our lives. So would you convict us in the way that we need conviction? Would you encourage us? Would you empower us? Would you give us all that we need to walk as faithful disciples in the world? Amen. Amen. Hey, thanks for coming. Hopefully I'll see you on the 22nd for Youth Worship Night, and we'll go from there.